I'm going to be moderating this session. My name is Marla Haber Goldstein. I'm an architect and conservation consultant in Israel. Good day and welcome everyone and our honorable guests. The second day of our World Heritage Conference takes us into the area of the world east and south of Europe where we began yesterday. In this session, our speakers will discuss projects and issues that are both unique to this region as well as being universal. Professor Bandyopadhyay will share his experiences and planning approaches with us.
Thank you very much. Can I share my screen? Is that okay?
Yes, it is.
Okay, thank you. Can you see my slides? Is it visible?
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
Fantastic. I'll do that as full screen now. Thank you. Okay. Good day, everyone. Thank you very much for the kind invitation to talk. And I will try to, having moved from a kind of physical in-person format to an online format, I'll try to keep it as brief as I can. And but it is a really very important occasion where I'm delighted to present my reflections on the Middle East, especially drawing my experiences from Oman, which is where I've been working and researching over the last 30 years or so. What I titled this work, although as has been said already, that I will focus on the Bahla World Heritage region, and I will draw on examples from that region and where we have had different sorts of interventions where we have proposed. And it is one reflection that I really think that is quite relevant, not only to this Middle Eastern region, but also worldwide, that the heritage, built heritage, is significant across the world. And I think if we have to conserve the heritage and we have to uphold the spirit of that heritage, then we have to possibly take a range of measures which will then bring together our architectural heritage in a more relevant way to the future generation. I title my thing as Architectural Intervention in Vernacular Context and Beyond Instrumentality. What I mean is that we have evolved our architectural education based on many of the kind of key 19th century changes and developments that took place in architectural education, which obviously led to the development of descriptive geometries and compositions, and also that eventually informed the conservation sciences as well. Now, that created a degree of instrumentality, which, while it's absolutely necessary, but I believe, and this is my contention here, that for World Heritage Sites, and for that matter, indeed, for heritage sites across the world, we need to take a much more encompassing view in order to make heritage meaningful for future generations. And also, essentially, to keep the fact that inevitably change is inevitable. And I think without change, heritage is also meaningless. So I will do my presentation on the kind of framework of that, presenting the work of the Research Center Archeam, as has been mentioned, which is based at the Liverpool University. I would like to broaden that in order to suggest that we go beyond instrumentality. I would like to suggest that we focus on a number of issues which are critical to and can be enumerated, and that is to do with atmosphere. That is that a context that within which we operate, within our heritage operates, and that has got a kind of reciprocal relationship, breathing in and extending out, in both measures. The other thing is situatedness, and that is to do with positioning, but also situating buildings and elements of buildings in opposition to each other. The third element is about the breathing enclosure, and the kind of the way that the porosity and the reciprocity that is created as a result of the enclosure. And finally, tectonics and materiality, which is both latent in certain cases and prominent. I also suggest that, what we are essentially doing and kind of following Vittorio Grigotti's suggestion, which has been a very noted one, which is about modification. Essentially, what we are doing is modifying the environment continually. And that is a method of critical awareness, as he says, of the reasons for the constitution of the present and its history as a response to specific condition. And the modification goes beyond the type modification, which I would argue has to be kind of kept in mind. And then also in essentially what is important in heritage is the kind of calibration or measuring of the modification that we undertake and its constant relationship that we have to be aware of in relation to the existing heritage. And finally, program, aligning the everyday, I would suggest, with the historic. And that is quite critical and has to be kept in mind. And I draw these, and obviously I do not have any opportunity to develop this in greater detail, but these are drawn from, as you can see on the right-hand side, some well-known images from the modern movement. To keep the program in mind, one of the things that we have to do is to approach the reuse in a way that it guarantees relevance to all stakeholder concern and from an integrated economic, social, and cultural perspective. So therefore, what I suggest is obviously there's the past, the present, and the future. You've got the environment, the society, and the economics. And the interplay of these things will suggest the new program, but also will address the aspirations and the desires and the challenges of the future, the present and the future generation. Very importantly for us, and I think it's a big step forward, is the historic urban landscape approach, the Hull approach, which I think we have to keep in mind, as we think about design. But thankfully, I think this is the kind of major move I would suggest, which begins to not only accommodate the key aspects of the community and the civic engagement tools and the knowledge development, the regulatory systems and sustainable financial tools, but within the structure, it allows us to integrate design, architectural design for future generations more effectively. Now, as I suggest, as a result of that, through this, that sociocultural, economic, and governance aspects, environmental and public health aspects in urban form and architecture has to work together. And the way that we collect that data is through fieldwork documentation, ethnographic surveys, scales of analysis that will result from it, then further documentation and analysis of which will create an integrated archive as well, and key sustainability findings that will have to be constantly reflected against, as has already been suggested, that the SDGs are critical to all of this. Just as a kind of note that the RKM Research Center, which is based at Liverpool University, is the architecture and cultural heritage of India, Arabia, and the Maghreb. We work in different locations across India, Middle East, and also in the North African region, but I'll focus on Oman for today. The Bahla World Heritage Site, which is one of the kind of central, in the central region of Oman, has got extensive architectural heritage, but also cultural heritage in the form of agricultural production and so on. The World Heritage Site, core site, has got a 12-kilometer wall surrounding it. But the core of that has this fortification. There's a major fortification which was possibly built during the pre-Islamic times and kind of successively built on it. This is entirely mud brick and some stone structures, and that is where I think the distinction of the Middle Eastern architectural and heritage assemblage is quite notable. And how do we actually engage with that kind of complex but also very vulnerable heritage situations? That is what we will be focusing on. But in that region, the same region, we have the Niswa Oasis. Also, again, we have worked on that, where we have projected several suggestions to do with master planning, which will engage and integrate the future the demands of, and challenges, but also that in the architectural propositions, where we were looking at various projects, but in one of those things was a repository, another one was a food court. But one of the things that I would like to highlight in these projects is that the kind of combination of the tectonic elements that are quite important, which we feel would actually bring the contemporary together with the historic, and therefore engender in the residents and the stakeholders a kind of desire and a kind of understanding of the relationship between the past and the future, but also the everyday program, that is that of activities that we undertake every day, that is aligned very closely here with historic elements such as repositories and so on. Now, moving to another project, which I think would have a strong relevance to this particular proposition, is where in Salalah, where we did intervention on a private project, which was converted into a cultural center, where we found the project in a situation like this, where pretty much most of it was gone. It was an 18th century merchant house, which we were working on. And through various propositions, when we came to the eventual design and the manifestation, the implementation, the cultural center programmatically was kind of considered to be part of a wider spectrum of activities, which will include also financial generation opportunities such as short stay accommodation, shops, and so on and so forth, so that it could actually have a private sustenance. But on the other hand, the architectural propositions that we were looking at were then playing with this idea of situatedness, whereby what was essentially old, has one quality of situatedness, whereas given the nature of the damage that was created to the building, we had to actually bring in another level of situatedness. But on the other hand, what was lost, that is the kind of northern wall of this building, had to be created as a kind of, if you like, a floating one, which therefore would suggest the kind of new intervention, as I can show here, whereby the northern wall was completely floating and suggested in these sketches here, whereas the new element which was introduced, which will hold the northern part back, would actually create an anchor through the structural device, a new situatedness. So there is a kind of play between the old and the new situatedness that we play with in these kind of various measures. And as I was saying, the cross-programming for financial sustainability through cultural center exhibits, short stay accommodation, shops, and so on, were eventually created to create this viable program. And the time that I'll spend now on is this real project, the final project that I will show in the Alhambra Oasis, just within the Bahla World Heritage Site region, Misfat al-Abreen small village, which is a hilltop village, which is sitting within the Bahla World Heritage Site region. It has got extensive date palm cultivation oasis sites around it. Obviously, with many of these sites, we do not have any drawn documentation or indeed ethnographic documentation. One of the things that we try to do in all of our work is to bring together original documentation, but also aligning any existing documentation. But in most cases, we have new documentation, and that is both physical documentation, terrestrial work, as well as drone-based work. And then that is aligned with ethnographic work, which we undertake across the region, from built heritage, understanding of the oral history on built heritage, to the landscapes, cultural landscapes, such as agricultural land, as you can see here. But also aligning with the the Historic Urban Landscape Program, what we undertook here is to develop a local community-based cooperative system, which we work very closely with to develop with the local community. And that was then aligned with an extensive work on economic measures to understand capital investment, to understand expenditures and so on, in order to actually create a sustainable future for this place. But at the same time, we also undertook extensive sustainable energy measures, and that was actually factored into the work, as well as the kind of reworking of traffic and parking and so on and so forth, so that again all of these things were fed back into the economic measurements. So the master plan integrated historic concerns, which were coming out of both the historic studies, the oral history, and so on, but at the same time engaging with the contemporary demands of parking to the practical needs of financial investments and so on and so forth. Now, that also aligned with extensive work on with corporate bodies to generate funds for a phase 1 development, which we undertook. And again, all along that, we were working very closely with the local community to develop the work through workshops, develop ideas and concepts, including developing ideas and concepts with children, local children who participated in that. And that resulted in a whole series of interventions, which is the phase 1 supported by the Bank Basket, which was our corporate social responsibility support body, where we found a series of places, locations. For example, the very important gateway into the settlement, which was in a really critical state, which we evolved into both sustaining the gateway, but also creating a kind of information center. The information center, what it did was to bring this idea of atmosphere, and calibrating the atmosphere, making sure that the context was actually almost present within the building itself, but also introducing within the situatedness the idea, the opposition of a new architectonic element, a staircase, which was then a kind of consistent element right across the 3 or 4 projects that we undertook over there. And this is a very successful project. And the next one is very similar, where we developed a civic space, which was called the Shua, or a place where the Eid festivities would normally take place, and a building which was also had a kind of culinary element to it, which was a wheat grinding place and a kind of a bread making place, which we wanted to develop into a culinary training center, which was done again by looking at intervening in a very similar way. The tanur, or the kind of Eid festivities sort of roasting pit was maintained, and the facilities were actually restored back with a similar approach. The third site was in the same place, which is a very important and a very active one now, is a cafe and a restaurant, which was created on the edge of the settlement, bringing in the environment, as you like, whereby the cafe was introduced with new elements, and they were introduced with elements which would bring in the environment into it. That's why I call it the breathing enclosure, which has got different levels of porosity and reciprocity, i.e. going out as well as coming back in, but also giving this one, for a change, a tectonic prominence. Now, in all of these cases, we are looking into and modifying the type, the building type, and this is what we do here. I just show the examples of how an existing Omani building type of the interior of Oman was modified through the different projects, not only through the change in the staircase, but in the understanding of how the staircase element worked as a fulcrum within the buildings and how that could be slightly modified. Equally, the environmental aspect was, these were entirely passively ventilated buildings, whereby we used the building enclosure and the overlapping cover to ensure that we could create environments of sustainable environments. Another element that I think was quite important for us was taking the cues. When it rains in these areas and up in the hills, it rains quite heavily. So the water was quite important for us to consider, and the drainage of water, but we use that as a kind of architectural means which would actually bring the water down through the building and then out. And that would, in a way, evoke the kind of the age-old, which goes back to about 1000 BC, the underground water systems in Oman, which are called the Falad systems, which are really a constant presence in these settlements. So just to complete and conclude, what I have briefly alluded to is that in these projects around the Bahla World Heritage Site, we have been looking into how these other less instrumental elements, such as atmosphere, situatedness, the breathing enclosure, the tectonics and materiality, but also modification and calibration, could actually be brought into the architectural and tectonic manifestations. And thank you very much for allowing me to present, and really greetings to everyone. Thank you.
Okay, next we will continue with Professor Michael Turner, please.
Kind of Good afternoon, and thank you to the organizers, to Kasim and Mohammed, and to Marla for introducing me. And it is an important opportunity also to mention the fact that we're moving from the next 50 years and to try to debate where we're going to go. We're looking at the UIA region 2, which is a potpourri of countries going from Czechia to Kazakhstan. And therefore, it's almost impossible to try to understand what is the geocultural understanding of the area. But if we were to look at exactly how it evolved essentially two rivers. Look at the area of the Mediterranean, which we can see over here, and the Endoric areas of Central Asia. And we can understand how Herodotus actually determined his understanding of the world through the seas and the rivers around the Mediterranean. So I shall actually have a little look about the Mediterranean, the Eastern Mediterranean, as part of our UIA region. And it's been essentially waves of empires, the empires of Alexander the Great, the Roman Empire with the Decapolis, with cities which created leagues. We also have then the conflicts between the Crusaders and the Muslims, and then the Mongol Empire arriving as far as Hungary of today, with its own architecture and its own understanding. And lately we have the Ottoman Empire, some 500 years, leaving a legacy which is very, very critical for understanding of their heritage. Bursa and Kamalchik, the birth of the Ottoman Empire. And within our area, we've got tens and almost hundreds of World Heritage sites. The World Heritage sites, which you can see in yellow, and also the World Heritage sites in danger, which we can see in red. And we cannot continue without supporting our colleagues in southern Turkey and northern Syria on the terrible tragedy which is evolving, both human and cultural, over the past days. So there is now a new opportunity, and exactly which was mentioned previously, about recovery and reconstruction, and about the approaches which the World Bank has had about building back better. So we have to look at then what is then the next part of the future. In fact, we have to look at over the next 50 years, we're going to have two major issues. And the first issue is that of a new urban typology. And the second one will be that of digital technology. The metropolises will represent human settlements with the largest population worldwide, followed by rural settlements and other urban settlement configurations. And according to the World Bank and UN Habitat, a new metropolis will evolve every 2 weeks over the next 15 years for a total of 429 new metropolises. And we have to get our heads around to understand what is heritage and the metropolis. Currently, I'm involved in a project which is called Heritopolis. You might want to look at it, www.heritopolis.org. But it is that the city disintegrates into an archipelago and fragments. A new role is imposed on the landscape, and a carrier of topographical characterizations, cohesion and continuity. And it's these new patterns and new fragmentations that we need to understand for the future. And the future is going to be a more integrative city. We have currently silo approaches with the UNDRR with the Resilient Cities Program, UNEP with Sustainable Cities, WHO with Healthy Cities, UNESCO with Creative Cities. Everybody's got their own little city. What we need to do is create the integrative city, putting the cultural heritage will be sewn back into the wider urban fabric. The second challenge which we'll have over the next 50 years is moving from centralized hierarchies to distributed networks. And the digital revolution with our smartphones is now empowers the individuals rather than the external hierarchies. Even though hierarchies and bureaucracies do not innovate, free and empowered individuals do. Knowledge, innovation, spontaneity, and self-reliance are becoming increasingly valued and promoted. And this is going to change exactly how we manage our heritage in the future. And if we want to have then the last part is that over the next decade, cities will continue to grow larger and more rapidly. So the actual data science and WeChat GPT is going to then actually bombast us with so much data that we're going to have a unique civic laboratory, a place where technology is adapted in novel ways to meet local needs. And as Soumyen spoke about, the historic urban landscape has been the major change from moving from the monument to, in fact, the urbanism. And the idea, therefore, that it is beyond the historic center and the ensemble, and there's now much more better understanding between the urban attributes and the architectural attributes, the topography, the geomorphology, the hydrology, all the natural features, together with the intangible heritage, which was so well demonstrated in the previous lecture on Oman. And then we also have the attributes, and we are discussing the architecture is the form and design, the use and function, mass and scale. And these are the critical elements which make up then our understanding of heritage of the past, but the creation of heritage of the future. And if we look therefore at what the UIA, our work program of heritage, is also to collaborate with international bodies to ensure wider dissemination. Together with the HUL and the SDGs, we have to then begin to understand that we also have the most important is the new urban agenda. There's urban design takes place as a critical element, which is which challenges us for new architecture. The new life for historic cities, and therefore soft measures for culture, bring us about to understand exactly modern heritage and to taking traditional building techniques and using them into a new forms. So we're looking therefore of new elements into historic areas. How do we deal with the vernacular, the traditional, the modern, and the contemporary? We see these elements, and how do we relate to them? And I can only but say that, in fact, that the architecture, that we should look at the challenges for the future heritage is in two parts. That which is urban, the settlements, the safe, inclusive, resilient, and sustainable, and the architectural, which relates to climate, to materials, to construction and technology. And in fact, I would like to end very simply and say exactly that the architecture of today will be the heritage of tomorrow. And therefore, our contribution and our understanding of what, in fact, this contemporary and modern feeling which Corbusier left with us is probably the challenge which we have for the next 50 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Turner. We will now go on to our next presenter, Professor Güliz BİLGİN ALTINÖZ, and then there will be some time for questions and discussion. You can put the questions in the chat.
Well, thank you for this giving this place for presentation. Unfortunately, we are in an extreme condition, I should say, because of all these earthquake waves that we have been experiencing in the last 2 weeks. And even today we had 2 more, which shocked us again. And we have a lot of distractions around. So my presentation will be not the one that I was supposed to do at the moment. And well, I will present a little bit from that one, but I will also focus on some of the recent issues to discuss with. However, I should also say that due to all these things going on, I'm not sure how structured I'll be able to present it. So please excuse beforehand. So I would like to share my screen first. Sorry, there's a problem with the presentation.
I think you need to open the file before you share.
Oh, it went too much. Okay. Well, the presentation previously I was supposed to do was about discussing the challenges and opportunities of being registered as a World Heritage Site based on a case from Turkey, a multi-layered site, Bergama. But today I'll focus more on different aspects of it. First of all, I would like to say that before anything is a heritage place, a place itself is a result of the relation between people and life. First of all, there's people and life there, which is in relation with the physical environment, which is natural physical environment, and also the existing built-up environment, and with external forces and context is shaped. So all these all together shape the places that we're living in. However, we should also say that there's another important aspect, the time, which changes everything. And together with the time, like any place, as we have also mentioned in the other presentation, everything changes. And that changes the physical environment, the demographic aspects of the area, the external forces as well, and so on. And also that time changes also makes us look at these places from a distance. They become past places, and we reconsider them together with their other different values, sociocultural and economic values, and then we call those places as heritage places, which also starts a kind of a curiosity, interest, and also conservation and management towards those places. But this also brings another life to those places, like in various cases that we can see. UNESCO Convention concerning the protection of the world natural and cultural heritage was another breaking point in the life of those heritage places, we can say, because following that, those places are not just considered as heritage of the nations or the people, but also a new concept called World Heritage also made us look at those places with a global curiosity and interest and values, of course, as well. And with the convention, we started to focus on the outstanding universal values of those places, their authenticity, integrity, and protection and management following them. However, I should also say that Turkey, we are now celebrating the 50th anniversary. We have celebrated last year the 50th anniversary of the World Heritage Convention. Turkey accepted the convention 10 years later. And so it's the 40th anniversary for Turkey, I can say. And also during that process, there were, of course, some revisions and some new ideas coming as well, following the experiences, like during the 30th anniversary, 4 main strategic targets were defined as credibility, conservation, capacity building, and communication, which were very important for those heritage places. So they were not just considered as the physical aspects or the tangible and intangible values of them, but the other aspects should be considered during that period. Later on, a few years later, another C was added to that, which is community, which is very important because all these places, as I have mentioned at the very beginning, are places where life is going on. So it's very important to integrate those people into that heritage conservation process so that it can be successful. Otherwise, we cannot achieve our goals and targets. Of course, in the following years, we also had other experiences. Unfortunately, we had a lot of wars and conflicts and disasters, and as a result of which in 2018, again, there was another recommendation about the recovery and reconstruction of cultural heritage. In conservation field, we generally do not, the reconstructions are not the real places themselves sometimes. So it's not so much supported in some of the cases, but in the cases of wars and disasters, then it can become somewhat essential as well. So for the case of Turkey, following all these years, now we have 17 heritage places distributed all around the country, 17 cultural properties, and there are also cultural and natural properties, 2 of them. And so in total, 19 properties, and we have more than 77 tentative properties in the tentative list as well. During that process, we have experienced that being a UNESCO World Heritage brings concepts like value, prestige, and brand as well. And it's very much related with curiosity, interest, consciousness, knowledge, conservation, and sometimes benefit as well, of course. And when the interest becomes more on, focus becomes more on the brand, because UNESCO World Heritage is an important brand, a global brand in itself, then it brings, of course, curiosity and interest, but mainly the economic comes to forefront, and consequently tourism, which is generally mass tourism and not that much sustainable, we can say. And that's following that global curiosity, interest, and value. The cultural tourism, which in fact is based on the existing outstanding values of the place, properties and spirits of the place, starts in a way consuming the place itself, and in a way it starts to give damage to those values, properties, and especially to the spirit of the place, you can say. Like we have seen in many of the world cities, there are a lot of issues about tourism and their impact on World Heritage sites. In Turkey, it is like that as well, especially in the last years when there, as we have also a kind of an economic crisis, heritage places started to gain another importance because they can provide economic benefit as well. And in the case of Bergama as well, when it was registered as a World Heritage Site in 2014, just following its registration, there was the news saying that Bergama is now onwards a World Heritage, which is very important for us. And the people and the locals of the Bergama also celebrated that registration at the night of the registration as well. They were very happy. And the mayor made an explanation saying that the words we don't see any tourists in Bergama will be over, especially there will be great change in the castle area, which is the heritage place, where people also live there. The number of boutique hotels and restaurants will increase. Bergama made a great job. So the reason why the place was registered was its spirit, tangible and intangible values, and so on. But just the day after, the change started in the place as well, because it could provide kind of a benefit. And following that, there were other news about other cases like Ephesus. And now it's Ephesus' turns, it was saying. Ephesus antique city was used by the locals living very close to the city. The students were making even their courses there. But after that process, it is just limited to the tourists mostly, and it started to change the relation between the place and people. Similar things happened in the places where there is also kind of the places which are in the tentative list, like the case of Milas, where there is the very important Hecatomnus' tomb was found. But the place was in fact a living historic urban tissue. And in that place, there was an urgent expropriation, and the area, the archaeological excavation started, the life stopped there, and even following this, the people of Bergama were no more able to enter the heart of the city where they were living previously without paying to the city itself. So this also started a kind of a weakening between the place and the local people. Of course, we should mention the pressure of the new development. Sometimes the benefit that can be provided by the tourism or other issues of the World Heritage are not enough, and new development brings more and more benefit. In that case, even it becomes more and more hard to stop development. So we have many other risks as well, and the risks are increasing in the last years. There are natural and human-induced risks, global changes, and crises, which also affect all these heritage places. Wars, conflicts, very close to the region, the geography that we are living. The climate change, which affects everywhere globally. Fires, floods, and earthquakes, migrations, energy crisis, economic crisis. These are very important. And those recent earthquakes really showed us how important they are. And we stopped even talking about the other issues, and we focused on the earthquakes and their consequences in Turkey and in the northern Syria. I will mainly focus to the Turkey case today. I mean, some of the examples. Turkey, as geographically, location, and its properties, when we look at it, it's really a first-degree earthquake zone. So there had been very important earthquakes since antiquity onwards in that region. And there had been many ancient cities which are demolished and rebuilt and demolished every time. And this earthquake was one of the most severe earthquakes that we have experienced up to now. It affected such a huge area, 11 cities, which are, most of them are very important heritage places, urban heritage places, rural heritage places, world heritage places, and so on. And of course, there are so many losses, so many lives and livelihoods are lost. And this is the most important issue. However, there is also, I mean, we could also see the impact of the earthquake on the heritage places as well, cultural heritage of the people. And when I say cultural heritage of the people, I do not mean just the walls and stones and so on. All the lives, all the experiences, living places, the intangible aspects of those places are totally lost. People are lost, first of all. And when people do not live there, the heritage also, it's not so easy to keep the heritage as well. Most of the cities are, I mean, for example, Antakya, which was a very important, multi-layered, multicultural city, lost 80% of its heritage places, most of the monuments as well, and also I mean, the official explanations are about 35,000, but we believe that it is much, much more than this. Lives are lost as well. And the people who are still living in the city started to leave the city as well. Because as I have mentioned, just today, there happened 2 more earthquakes, which are very high as well, very striking. And they demolished the standing buildings totally. So today we do not know what is the end result as well. When I look at, because our focus is World Heritage, I will just return back to World Heritage in that region. One of the most important heritage places was Komagen and Nemrut kingdoms remains in the area in Adıyaman, Nemrut Tüneli. We do not know what is the condition is Nemrut Tüneli, because due to its location, it's in a very high location and it's under totally under snow. So we cannot even see from the satellite images what happened there. But there are other parts which are connected to the Nemrut Tüneli, which are also World Heritage sites, and there are destructions in those sites. For example, in the Karakuş Tüneli, one of the symbolic monuments in that area is demolished as a monument. Another World Heritage site was Diyarbakır Castle and the Hefsar Gardens. And in the castle, there's some damage, but it's not too extreme. We can say there's some falling stones, but in general, the castle is still there. In Göbekli Tepe, there's almost no damage at all at the moment. But in the tentative list, this places in the tentative list, like Gaziantep Castle, there is a huge destruction in the castle itself. And as you can see in Antakya, especially Antakya really is hit by the earthquake extremely, we can say. So not only the new buildings, all the stone masonry buildings are put into pieces, we can say. And however, the earthquake was really such a huge one that, I mean, it's really demolished all the monuments. This is a view of Antakya before the earthquake. One of the most important buildings of Antakya, which doesn't exist anymore. These also are totally lost. There can be various reasons for that, those losses, but one of the reasons can be also that multi-layered character of Antakya and its location. We know even the archaeological remains show us that in Antakya previously also there happened in the 5th century AD, there happened a huge earthquake which demolished totally the city, we can say, and then the city resettled there. Now we have a settlement which has no people almost, and the whole city is demolished. Almost the whole city is demolished. So it becomes a huge question how we'll be able to recover and reconstruct those areas in such a huge scale. It's just like post-war condition, in fact, Second World War condition, we can say. So there will be, I'm sure following this, there'll be a lot of discussions about should we reconstruct the city with new and contemporary architecture, or should we try to reconstruct the historic city? I'm sure there will be a lot of pressure from the inhabitants to reconstruct, to have their past place as if nothing happened. But we do not know. Nobody can talk at the moment about cultural heritage and buildings. Now the lives are so important that this will come afterwards. So even though we are saying that these heritage places are unrenewable places, and we also consider some of them as World Heritage places, we should never forget that there's always a life going on there, and there's so many external forces that shapes the future of those places. Sometimes natural, but sometimes also human related source. I mean, politics, economics, ideologies, and so on. These also have a lot of impact on the future of those places, how these places are treated, and so on. So, of course, it will be perfect if we can consider World Heritage places based on their values, which can create consciousness, knowledge, and conservation, and provide us a sustainable development instead of just benefits. And it can continue to be an important tool for conservation. But we should never forget its relation with the locals as well, because when we're talking about the World Heritage place, it's in fact a heritage place and a place. And a place is very much related with the people living there and the existing context. So even though becoming a World Heritage place makes it a global brand, it's still a national heritage as well, and it has specific meanings and values for the local context as well. So it can be a World Heritage, be a national and local prestige, but it is also a part of the lives of the people as well. There are outstanding values that should that are important, and when a place becomes World Heritage Site, those values are considered more than the other values, local values and meanings of the people, which is an important issue that should be considered. And as I have said, economic benefits is always important. Based on economic value, which brings benefits, is important, but we should not forget that sociocultural values and their benefits are more important sometimes. That necessitates sustainable conservation and development. And therefore, what I can say is that these places cannot be considered just one-dimensionally. There's so many aspects of them, and there's so many fields that should be integrated in the conservation of those places. There are living contexts, there's tourism, there's conservation, there's planning and management, research and excavation, and so on. And the World Heritage Sites are at the center of it. And it's very important to find a kind of a global common language between various actors and stakeholders engaged in those processes, sharing the values and decisions for shaping the future. And dialogue and participation becomes very important in that, to be able to build consensus. Democracy, transparency, and the last experiences also show us that risk preparedness becomes a central issue in such places. And we hope that we'll be able to build the next 50 of the World Heritage in a better way by considering all these challenges and reconsidering the opportunities as well. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Congratulations, and the same to Professor Turner.
Thank you. Very interesting presentation. We have a few questions, and one maybe you can expand on, Professor Altinoz, about prevention heritage management, both in area of conflicts and earthquakes. So how do we address the issue that we need to develop more or better management skills of heritage areas?
Exactly. I mean, that is a very important issue. And as you know, for the World Heritage Sites, it's obligatory to prepare a management plan, which also includes risk management as well. And this is made on paper. I mean, in Nemrut, Adıyaman, we had this one. In Antakya, we had the plan as well. But when the disaster becomes that big, it is very important if the institutions which are responsible about applying those procedures are ready or not, are prepared or not. So also during the process, I mean, even though we're preparing, I mean, I was one of the team members of the preparing the conservation management plan for Comagene Nemrut conservation area. And we really prepared a very extensive and integrated conservation plan, we can say. However, these plans, when we look at the institutions here who are responsible of implementing those plans and controlling those plans, do not have the same capacity as the plans do have. Still, I mean, it's a very important tool, but it showed us that we're not that prepared. In the Antakya case as well, it's, for example, most of the historic monuments in Turkey are under the responsibility of foundations, General Directorate of Foundations. And the regional director of foundations is my PhD student, who is making his PhD thesis on the risk issue. So he was trying to prepare a risk management process for foundations as an institution, but now he is in the process itself, and it's not that easy. This experience showed us that it is very important to really to prepare the plans for preparing to the risks. First of all, to assess the risks, and then based on this to prepare the plans, and also to prepare the institutions who have capacity of the institutions who will be implementing those. But it is also sometimes, for example, the last earthquake that we have experienced is over all the estimations. The first one which hit the area was 7.8 the magnitude. Just a few minutes later, another one hit as well. 2 earthquakes one by one. The next day, there was another one, 7.6. Today, we have 2 more, 6.8 and 5.4, if I'm not mistaken. So it is not just one earthquake. And in most of the cases, even the engineers are making the assessments according to one big earthquake, but not such an earthquake wave. And because of that, even though, I mean, I can say that we were not really prepared institutionally, but still, if we were prepared so as well, I'm not sure what would happen, because as I have said, the monuments which were staying for thousands of years, they're all fallen to pieces right now, I can say.
Okay, thank you very much. We have a very different question. Soumyen, maybe you can address this. Someone wrote that there are private heritage sites in South Asia. And how can that be addressed, and how can heritage be sort of open to everyone when these sites exist?
Yes, thanks. And I was just saying that I agree that I think this is, and has been suggested by the talks this afternoon, that, you know, it is, it's a difficult proposition when we have a World Heritage Site and what the problems and the challenges that it brings in with it. And to my view, that I think it's quite important that we empower the local stakeholders more, rather than putting on just a label of World Heritage Site. Because unless we can embed the values right at that owner stakeholder level, empower them, make them aware, so that the opportunities are really understood. That is, economic, social, cultural opportunities at the level of those individual dwellings and properties and assets. I think there is an enormous asset that we are sitting on and we are never capitalizing. Now, once we do that empowerment, I think with that should happen very closely a kind of a much more geared and focused advice, and both professional and state party advice at that local level to owner-occupiers, so that they can actually take the best advantage of professional knowledge that is available. That is currently incredibly weak as well, and therefore they cannot benefit from it. And on top of that, I will add the other thing, that is training opportunities at that local level, which will really transform and embed some of the deeper World Heritage Site values at that local level. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mike, maybe you could expand on the issue of technological development. Does your Heritopolage group, how would it create interest in, let's say, new startups and things getting involved in technological developments for heritage and heritage sites?
Yeah, just one point I'd just like to add to Güliz's comments on the issue of preventive heritage. I think one of the most important things is documentation. And I think we have to expand on that and use the technology which we have to do documentation, which is clouds, which can actually do this. And this is really a critical part of it. And I think the other one is also protecting. We always know that the fire brigade with the water does more damage than the fire, and many times buildings which might be stable or not often will be pulled down just for mainly because of safety, and they could perhaps be also protected. We've seen this in Italy and L'Aquila especially, where we saw examples like this. So I'd just like to add that point on the preventive heritage. Well, technology, as I said, is also going to deal with documentation, but it's also crowdsourcing, and perhaps relates into the role of people to be able to actually make change, as opposed to authorized heritage discourses which come top down, but to allow then the technology of crowdsourcing to have people to be much more involved and to have a say within the heritage. And this is exactly what a change which will have to take place over the next 50 years, where we've had nations highlighting their national heritage, as opposed to actually understanding that the convention is putting heritage in the life of the community, which will be then the challenge of the next 50 years. Over.
Okay, thank you very much. I want to thank our speakers in this session for their very interesting and enlightening presentations. And we're going to move on to the next session. I'll pass it back to Kasim to introduce it.